Hello, Americans. I'm Kenton McNall. It's Constitution time. Today, our show is called Eve of Jeopardy. And it feels like it really may be. There's some unusual things that are going to happen tomorrow. But before we talk about that, I want to talk about the fact that our president, our current executive, essentially started campaigning for the 2020 election the minute he got into office, and he never stopped. He was still doing the job of the president up until about 6 months ago, when he went full-time doing nothing but campaigning. Until about 2 months ago, when he lost the election. And then he went full-time to do anything and everything he possibly could do to overthrow that election by any means. We learned that very vividly this week when, in a call to the Secretary of State of the state of Georgia and his attorney, the president made it completely clear how far he was willing to go, what he was willing to say or do, and how much pressure he was willing to bring to bear illegally to get what he wants, which is the overthrow of the 2020 presidential election. Tomorrow, in what I suspect will not be a proud day for America, some 15 to 20 senators are going to show their true loyalty, which is not to their country and which is not to the Constitution and which is not to the people who put them in office, but is to a man who would be a dictator. Is there any question in anyone's mind that if he were successful in an effort to overthrow this election and remained in office illegally and unconstitutionally, that he would never leave that office? I don't think there's any question of that at all, which means that anyone who is supporting that effort is supporting the effort of someone who is trying to be a dictator. And there's words for that. One of them is sedition. Why would people do that? I think the number one reason is because they think that when all the chips have fallen, that they might be on the right side of that dictatorship and that they might have the consequential power and be able to lord it over other people because they rolled the dice and came up on the right side. And that's why I think it's so important that if they truly do that, and if that is their motivation, that they should pay absolutely the highest price that they can pay politically, which is to not be voted into office again, and legally, if in fact they have committed acts against the Constitution. But that's my opinion. We want to discuss this evening the proceedings tomorrow, what should happen, what seems to be likely to happen now, and what appears to be happening. It'll take me just a moment to switch over and invite our guests on, so give me just a second. Very pleased to welcome back the two Stevens, Mr. Stephen Yu, Mr. Stephen Stack. Thank you, gentlemen, for being willing to join us again to talk about this same topic, which is the one that we talked about last time. But there's been an evolution in number of participants in tomorrow's objections and their possible goals. Let me make sure you're here audio-wise. Stephen?
Hello. Can you
Hi
hear
there.
me?
All right.
Hello. Hope I'm still here as well. Can you hear me?
I can, and I'm
All right.
very hopeful
Great.
that the audience can as well. All right. So let's bring everyone up to speed on what's going to happen tomorrow, what we now know is going to happen, which is quite different than what's supposed to happen and what we were talking about last time. Stephen Steck, could you just very quickly tell us what is supposed to happen tomorrow?
Sure. So basically, it's supposed to be a reasonably quick session, as long as there aren't any objections. But the Vice President of the United States gets up and has the four tally members read off the votes for each state from A to W. Um, and then at the end, the numbers are tallied and the vice president reads off the result of who the next president and vice president of the United States are going to be.
Okay, pretty straightforward.
Mhm.
Mr. Yu, what's your perspective on what we now know is likely to happen tomorrow?
Well, I don't think that much has changed from our discussion before, which is that whether or not the votes are from each state are accepted is really the key, and that is that the role of the vice president is just to read off the votes as they come in. There's no other role for the vice president. So it really devolves into the Senate and the House, what those members choose to do. And so if at least one senator and at least one member of the House of Representatives chooses to raise a written objection to a state or multiple states slate of electors, that's what's going to happen. They're going to submit it in writing, and then Mike Pence, assuming that he's there tomorrow, and if not, it will be the president pro tem, who's Chuck Grassley, will read off this objection, and then if there are any other objections to that state, they'll read those off as well. Once that's done, each of the chambers of Congress will meet individually and through a majority vote decide whether or not to sustain that objection. If the two houses both sustain the objection, then that slate of electors can be thrown out, and an alternate, if there was an alternate one, or just thrown out completely. But if either of the houses does not sustain the objection, then the slate of electors, as certified by the chief executive of the state, which is the governor, is counted, and all 50 states have had their electors certified by the governor at this point. So unless both houses vote to overrule that, nothing will happen. And Democrats currently control the House of Representatives, so it is exceedingly unlikely that any of these objections will be sustained.
So, and just to set the table a little bit more, all 50 states have certified their electors and their elections. So there is no false equivalency to 1876 and the events of that time, where there was a legitimate problem that the Congress had to solve. Uh, there's no objection that's legitimately going to be made there, which does not stop any representative and senator from making an objection. But we now know that 15 to 20 senators will participate in this, whether all 15 to 20 will put their name on a specific objection or not. And we know that they have at least the goal of having some kind of commission put together to solve in 10 days what we haven't solved in 2 months because there was nothing to solve. And we also know that there's the definite desire to have Vice President Pence do things outside of what he's supposed to do, which is very clerical, to make decisions, possibly force votes, and create this commission. we know for sure that the president wants that, and the other senators and people involved in this thing that's going to happen tomorrow have also talked about that. Is that kind of what your understanding is as well?
Yeah, certainly that's kind of what is being expected of Vice President Pence, even if it's not what is laid out. They want a commission similar to the one in 1876, which was before the 1876, 1877 rules and laws that were passed about what to do about disagreements with states. So before that, it was unclear. The Constitution didn't really outline what happened if multiple states sent forth quote unquote certified electors. It was up to Congress as to how to sort that out. And so in 1876, the way they sorted it out was with a commission, but have since clarified the rules, created a law so that it's just sorted out by simple majority votes.
So, yeah, go ahead, Stephen.
Let's keep in mind the major difference here is that there were multiple slates of electors that were presented. That is not the case today. There is only one slate of electors per state, meaning that no legislatures of any state said, no, the slate of electors that the governor has certified is not the right one. We're sending an alternate slate here. So
right.
There's no need for a commission because there's no other alternative.
Right, but they're not objecting to the electors per se. They're objecting to what the electors are voting. They want the electors to vote the other way.
And that there's no objection to that. There's only an objection to the slate of electors themselves. It is not the right of Congress or the vice president or the president, for that matter, to tell electors how they vote. That is it's up to each state and their set of electors how their electors are both selected and how they're either forced to vote or not vote, depending on the state.
So if the vice president was doing his job tomorrow, which he may do, if he's doing his job, they won't even get off first base because they don't have a valid objection to the elector.
Correct, but it will still require that they discuss each elector or slate of electors from a state for up to 2 hours individually.
Now, my understanding is that is only if the objection is upheld by the chair. For example, Maxine Waters back in 2001 had an objection, wasn't backed up by a senator. Al Gore, the loser of that election, who had conceded that election, said, sorry, it's over, sit down. The rules do care. So I think that the objection has to be recognized as a valid objection before they go off and spend their 2 hours. Is that not correct?
Yes, that is correct, but
it's kind of dangerous waters for the vice president to say that a objection that has in writing both a senator and a House member is not valid. I don't think they would want to test those waters.
I'm guessing that they won't, whether they want to or not. So I agree. And that's another one of the false equivalencies that's been stated out there, which is one of the things I want to talk about, which is the possible motivations for this tomorrow. Is, we're just trying to make sure elections are free and fair, and the Democrats have raised objections before. But a lone congresswoman raising an objection that without a senator to co-sponsor as a statement is not an equivalent in an election where it had been properly conceded and the person who lost was actually the chair. But that's the example that's raised of why they're legitimately doing this. So what do so of the range of reasons that these folks might be doing this tomorrow, on the least harmful side is that they just want to be heard, and on the most harmful side is that they are literally trying to overthrow the election, and in the middle is they want to delay for some reason. Stephen Steck, starting with you, what's your opinion on why they're doing this tomorrow?
I mean, my initial gut feel is that they want to appeal to a base that has shown they're willing to give a fair amount of money and throw their weight behind candidates. And so it's just we don't want to anger the base kind of thing. I don't think any of them think that it will go anywhere. They just want to put their name down.
Mr. Yu?
So you said that there were 3 possible outcomes, but I think there's actually a fourth, or possible motivations, I should say. I think there is actually a fourth, which has little to do with the outcome of this particular election for president, but rather position themselves for a future 2024 run, or possibly more power / sway. And that's very likely what some of the senators, such as Josh Hawley of Missouri, are doing, which is to basically, at least his purported claim is that he is challenging the slate of electors from Pennsylvania because they're violating Pennsylvania state law. He has neither the standing nor does Congress have the standing to challenge that. That's up to the state legislatures and the state Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. So really, he knows, and of course, Josh Hawley is himself is a Yale and Stanford trained lawyer. So he very likely knows that the objection will go nowhere. But by doing so, he is appealing to Trump's base by saying, look, I'm standing up and objecting to this and helping the president out. And of course, he knows that this will go nowhere, but that he has now made himself sort of a hero and will likely mean that he has a chance to run for higher office in 4 years.
Interestingly, both of you have cited the desire to impress the base, but neither one of you have cited what I think is the true desire, which is the audience of one that they're playing to, which is Trump himself. But I sincerely hope that, as we all experience the Trump hangover that we will experience, I hope not for years, but for a long time to come, that America will realize that they were, besotted as if by wine and as briefly with Trump, and that having favor with him is not going to mean what people think it means. But I agree with you, Stephen, that is a possible fourth reason that they're doing this. Now, if we talk for a second about what Pence could try to do, because I'm envisioning they're in the joint session and Pence makes a decision or a motion or calls for a vote on the creation of the commission in some way or form, or tries to order it. Now, I know that both of you will say, and rightly so, it's not in the Constitution. But there's a lot of things not in the Constitution that have been happening. What would the result of that be, physically, literally, in the meeting, if he tried to do something like that? If he tried to act as a judge with authority beyond the authority of this procedure?
I mean, I would hope that the result would be his removal as the chair of the
By
proceedings.
who?
And
by who?
Either the body as a whole or by the Rules Committee. And either of them would instate Grassley. It's kind of uncharted waters. We saw a little bit of removing the chair in Pennsylvania today, but it's definitely really uncharted waters looking at it at a federal level like that.
I just don't think that they would even get there. If he tried to do that, it would have to be ignored. Like no one would actually vote on it because it's not part of the Constitution, but it's really not part of the very strict set of rules about counting, because it goes down to the representatives, the Senate and House of Representatives must meet at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on this particular day to open these votes, read them, count them, check for objections, and then immediately continue state by state. It even says immediately. So there is no intermediate phase where Pence gets to decide, oh, I'm going to try to open a separate motion or something else. It is such a non sequitur that I suspect what would happen is that most members of Congress would just not do anything. They would just say, this is, yeah. So there's no even a mechanism for them to vote, because remember, this is being held in the House, not in the Senate. The senators don't have like their voting. In fact, it's entirely possible due to COVID, not everyone even will be there in the House. They may only be in separate groups. And so Pence would just be speaking mostly to an empty floor, and someone might remind him, hey, you have to continue counting the vote. But otherwise, I suspect nothing else would happen if it came to that.
Well, I've talked on this show before about our friend Historical Norm. That's all we're counting on here. And if they literally just smack the gavel and say, decided we're doing this commission, and therefore we are not completing the process of counting the electoral votes, there's nothing to stop that.
Well,
in
of
my
course,
opinion.
but Trump could tomorrow say that he's the supreme dictator of the United States, and he's going to stay in office forever. And there's nothing to stop that. No historical norms, at least. But at that point, I would hope and suspect that the military would not follow him, that law enforcement would not follow him, and that anything he said and did would be basically ignored. The same would happen to Pence if he tried to arbitrarily declare whatever he wanted to declare tomorrow, if it was outside of the strict reading of how you're supposed to count the electoral votes.
But would you not agree that there is no context for any effort to try to create a commission in tomorrow's proceeding, correct? There's no context for it. No procedure,
the only context
no rule.
The only context is from before the rules that outlined how this particular session goes. Pre-1876, it was open to interpretation as to how they wanted to run the session. The Rules Committee actually recently, was that yesterday, I think, or the day before, released their, here's how this particular 2021 session will go. It's about a paragraph long, a long paragraph, but about a paragraph long, and just basically reaffirms that they'll go through the states A through W with no room for anything other than objections to a given state.
So to talk about the objections for just a moment, because I think it's reasonable to assume that there will be some, that they will separate probably multiple times for the 2 hours. The the side raising the objections will undoubtedly use every minute of their 5 minutes times 10 members to make their case or state their opinion or get on the stump or start their presidential run for 2024 or whatever they're doing. Do you think the Democrats will do the same, or will they not use their time to keep things moving along?
I think for the first one or two, they'll use their time, not fully if I had to guess, but they'll at least use some portion of their time. And then every time thereafter, they may be super brief. I really only would expect it to break out 6 times at most, maybe 7. I don't expect there to be objections to every state to try and drag the whole thing out. I think that would just result in people being removed.
And a strict reading, again, I did a strict reading of the rules. If they did that, they would be forced to be in session without breaks, because every time that the House and the Senate meet separately and vote against sustaining the objection, the vice president must immediately announce the decision and then dispose of the next state's votes. So there, again, is no intervening. And so every time there's an objection, they're forced to then go to the next set of votes, which a strict reading would mean that they would be there in 2-hour increments for all 50 of the states if it came down to that. And at some point, someone would probably just collapse and, that'd be the end of that.
Well, they'll be dragged from the chamber like the old days, when they were all drunk anyway.
Right.
But
it is entirely possible that they could go till midnight if all 6 of the states that they want to object to, which are the battleground states, are discussed. And I suspect that there will be enough grandstanding on both sides that the full 2 hours will be taken.
It could very well be. I think it's dangerous to let some of the things we'll probably hear tomorrow go unanswered at the same time. So I would suspect that they'll answer. Well, I heard a news report, don't know if it's true or not, that Vice President Pence has been carefully studying the history and the rules and has made a statement that he intends to follow the rules and the law. But lots of things have happened in the past that are not in the same context as now, but they happened somehow in the past, and there was no rules to govern them then. So hopefully there's enough rules to govern this now, because it will be very interesting to see what happens if they step off the path, and how objections will be raised and how they'll be enforced. As you said, they are in the House chamber. I would think that Nancy Pelosi has some say-so, at least physically, over the space, right? So now,
She's
of course,
got the mace.
What's that?
She's got the mace.
She's got the gavel, a big one.
And she has the sergeant at arms.
She has the sergeant at arms, yeah.
Which
that's
could
what I was
be used.
That's what I was referring to, basically. All right, what have we not covered here? Let me ask you the question: if they're going for the jackpot here, if they're literally trying to, in some way, flip the results of this election, sedition?
I mean, I don't think anyone is serious except possibly Trump and his cohort in trying to flip the results. They've seen the results of the recounts and everything else and know that Trump has lost. If for whatever reason they try to change that, then yes, it is very much outside the Constitution, which is sedition. And so if they're going to try to do that, then it's the start of the Civil War, though there may not be many participants on the opposing side.
The only interesting thing I've seen is that a lot of the swing states had the Republican electors meet and vote and create unofficial results, and it's unclear what would happen other than legitimate objections if Pence tried to get them read in that meeting, because they're not certified by anyone
Wouldn't
other
they
than the
have had,
electors.
would they have had to have been submitted in the same way that the certified electors were submitted to be considered? Or is that just some wild thing that Pence could try to do that's completely outside the rules?
Yeah, I mean, he could just pull random pieces of paper and hand them out with random votes on them. I don't know what would happen then, other than it's just not him following the rules again. So, but that's the only thing that I've seen that could potentially drag it out further, is if Pence decided for some reason to hand out the alternative slates that aren't certified by anyone other than the electors, then it's unclear as to how those objections would go, if they would even be needed. That they probably wouldn't be needed because the talliers just wouldn't tally them.
The talliers couldn't tally. Sounds like the start of an epic poem about the incident. I have a feeling that Pence won't do this. And that will make things pretty interesting, especially for him, especially after the proceedings. But we'll see. Well, gentlemen,
I think that if Pence does do this, his electoral future is over, whatever else happens, and he's too clever and too much of a politician to want to do that.
well, as I pretty boldly stated up front, I think they should all be done after this, and I just mean politically. I mean in no other way. I'm quite concerned about the possibility of violence in Washington, D.C. tomorrow. I hope that doesn't happen. Very fervently hope that doesn't happen. But this is the last stop of actual constitutional events before January 20th. And I actually think it is our most dangerous time from the standpoint of the president, of what he might do after this, because there's nothing on the calendar except the inauguration of Joe Biden after this event. So I have a feeling it will be our most dangerous time. Have we left anything out of the discussion of other possibilities for tomorrow?
No,
All right.
I think hopefully it's a quick half an hour session.
Yeah, everybody changes their mind. They work it out overnight. That'd be
Or
terrific.
they figure out that's the only result. I'm still convinced that that Israeli professor who said that UFOs are real and Trump is hiding it from us will be right, and Trump will tweet that tomorrow, and that our new alien overlords are taking over. So that's my expected outcome for tomorrow.
He's allowed to declassify anything he wants.
Exactly.
If it's aliens, he can declassify it.
It could be a very interesting period of time. I do think some damage will be done on the way out the door, and in some ways, one thing that I think you could say about Trump is that he's approached the job quite like an everyman, a regular guy in the U.S. It may be part of his appeal to his base, and that's the kind of thing that a regular guy might do on the way out the door, and it's better than hitting the newt, right? So, all right, gentlemen, I truly appreciate your time this evening. Thank you very much. Hope to see you again, and to everybody watching, thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Please take care. Please stay clear of COVID, and join us again on Constitution Time.